Penguin Audio presents Nauti Temptress by Lora Leigh. Read by Manxie Hardy. Prologue. The fat, evil little leprechaun was interfering in their lives again in a way they would never recover from. Rowdy could feel it. It was like a chill chasing up his spine. It was a premonition of hell. It was a certainty that perhaps they should have just shot his ass when he interfered the last time. But that last time hadn't been with one of the Mackays, just a friend. And not an old and dear one at that. The brother of an old and dear friend wasn't exactly the same. Standing in the marina office and staring out the heavy glass door, he wondered what the little bastard was up to this time. His eyes narrowed against the bright summer sun as the fat little bastard, a.k.a. Timothy Cranston, stood at the open back passenger door of the black Ford Excursion, his attention on the occupants he was obviously speaking to. He was apparently debating something with them, Rowdy thought. The tension in Cranston's shoulders was a sure indication that his frustration level was rising. There were times Rowdy and his cousins might like the former Homeland Security agent, but other times he was more trouble than he was worth. Rowdy had a feeling he was about to become more trouble than he was worth again. "What the hell is he up to?" Natches murmured as he paced to the door to stand beside Rowdy. Rowdy didn't miss the word his cousin had almost used instead. A grin quirking his lips, he slid Natches an amused, knowing look. "Bliss said the F word the other day." Natches sighed in disgust. "Chai is of course blaming it on me." "I never hear it slipping past her lips, I have to admit," Dawg drawled from behind them. "Warned you about that, cuz." Rowdy glanced behind him where his cousin Dawg sat back in the easy chair next to the desk, his long legs stretched out, a newspaper in hand as he read an article on a story he'd been following for a few weeks now. He seemed unusually interested in the reporter's far-fetched evidence that there was some conspiracy brewing in the mountains of Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, where homeland militias were concerned. The article was being written by a reporter that had somehow managed to infiltrate one of those militias. "I'm telling you, it doesn't slip around Bliss. I don't want her to hear me talking like that," Natches bit out in frustration, his arms crossing over his chest as he glared at each of his cousins before turning back to Cranston. Normally, Rowdy would have agreed, because Natches was normally not one to slip up once he put his mind to something. "You say it often enough when you think she's not around," Dawg said, glancing around the side of the newspaper. Natches just shook his head. As he caught the tight-lipped scowl on Natches' face, Rowdy knew it would do little good to argue with his cousin over it. He was convinced he hadn't said the word around his daughter. Therefore, as far as he was concerned, he hadn't said it. Until they actually managed to catch him and point it out, then he'd continue to fight against the idea that he'd let it drop. Rowdy was more inclined to think it had happened out of Bliss's sight, just not out of her hearing. The three of them usually managed to hold back the words they didn't want their daughters to hear, whether the girls were around or not. They were all too aware of the fact that their girls were growing up and prone to be present, whether they could be seen or not. As far as Rowdy knew, he himself hadn't said that word since the last time he'd suspected Cranston was up to something. It never failed that the F word slipped out whenever that little bastard was messing in their lives. Holding his hand up in a wait gesture to the driver, Cranston closed the passenger door to the Excursion and began walking quickly to the marina offices. He wasn't as fat as he was the last time they'd seen him, Rowdy noted to himself. Not that he'd been overly round, but he had been a bit portly. His brown hair was still a little thin in the front, though, cut short everywhere else and standing on end as the wind whipping off the lake only made it worse. The tan suit he wore was rumpled and wrinkled, as though he'd slept in it for more than a few days. Beneath the suit, it appeared he might have been working out just a little. Frowning, Rowdy glanced to Natches, wondering whether he'd noticed.
"Sample complete. Ready to continue?"